I am living my ninth life. I remember all of them. I was first born on April 1st, 1328 in Messina, and I was named Lavinia Golding. Although I don't remember my earliest years as well as my more recent ones, there are some events that will forever be engraved in my memories. Messina was a very prosperous city in Europe at the time, and my father and my husband were both sailors. I would say that my first life was a pretty good one. I learned to cook and clean and draw from my mother and took care of my four lovely children. We lived a peaceful life until my father and my husband got back from sailing in the Black Sea. I was 19 years old. I was at the port awaiting their arrival with my children and my mother beside me when their ship docked. We quickly noticed that the majority of the crew, my father included, was already dead. The few crew members left alive, my husband one of them, were very ill and would soon be dead. I briefly saw my husband aboard the boat, barely recognizable. He was covered in black boils, in blood, and in pus. He looked on the brink of death. I quickly ushered our children behind me to prevent them from seeing their father like that. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I heard rumors of great pestilence in other parts of the world, but didn't imagine it would ever come here. The sailors started to come off the boat, and the police were trying to get them to turn around and leave the harbor, but it was already too late. From that day forward, nothing was the same. Many shops around the city, most of them, closed down, and many people either got sick and died or fled to the countryside. There was no cure for the Black Death. We lived with my mother, but when I started to see boils on her skin, the same kind of boils found on my husband's body, I knew what had to be done. I packed a few things, grabbed my four healthy children, and fled my childhood home, leaving my mother behind. We went to the countryside, but soon realized that nowhere was safe. I saw those same boils all over the animals in the fields. We were alone, and I had no idea what to do next. Eventually, I found a small shack where we stayed for a bit. I would only leave to try and find more food. We all slept on the hard floor, huddled together, hoping that the sickness would not last much longer. After a couple of days, we went to the nearby stream to bathe, and when my youngest daughter took off her shirt, I saw, between her shoulder blades, a black spot. I grabbed her to look at it closer, her body feeling warm, hoping that it was just a piece of dirt. But to my dismay, it was not. I I couldn't say anything about it. I needed time to think. Leaving my mother was hard enough. How am I supposed to leave my youngest child too? So I just didn't. I hugged my children tightly over the next couple of days as one by one they fell ill. Their smooth skin replaced by gross black boils that filled with blood and pus, knowing that there is nothing that can be done. Their groans of pain and vomit transform our little shack into a smelly, disgusting place. I tried to clean up, but I was more and more heartbroken with every wince my children made. Luckily, I was the last one to get sick, so my children didn't have to watch their mother die. One by one, they all died. It was almost a relief when they passed, knowing that their pain and their suffering was finally over. After my eldest daughter died, I lied with her, hugging her as tight to my chest as I possibly could, letting out cries of pain. And eventually, when they subsided, I fell asleep. When I woke up, everything was different. I felt different. I didn't feel the pain that I had felt when I fell asleep. I felt almost refreshed. Was I dead? Was I in heaven? I tried to speak, but all I could hear was screaming and crying. And when I opened my eyes, I couldn't really tell where I was. I felt somebody's hands all over the back of my body. Their hands felt very big. Or could it be that I was just very small? Anyway, I was moved in front of this woman who was wet all over her face, crying and smiling at the same time. It took me a while, but I had figured out that I was born again. I was no longer Lavinia Golding. I was Alexander Bertram, my second life. I was so confused. Thought maybe Lavinia was just a dream. Why am I allowed a second life? Why do I remember my first life? And how? Maybe this was my second chance at life, to live a fuller life. Anyway, it was a very different time, a different place. All of my surroundings were different, and yet some things still felt familiar. Since I was starting off again as a baby, my memories disappeared soon after my birth, but they eventually came back. It started as a weird feeling of deja vu, but eventually I was able to place them as memories in my mind. I was now living in the capital of the world, Constantinople. I was born during the Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire. I was born into a decent middle class family in 1417, four sisters and three brothers. My brothers and I worked long, hard days with our father on our farm. I hated being with animals. I always felt that they were going to pass some disease on to me or something. My family and I stayed away from politics mostly, kept to ourselves on the farm. Great. Being the oldest of the children, I had to take over my father's farm. My brothers and sisters all moved away, mostly to the city when our parents passed away. After they did, I started spending more and more time in the city, visiting my sisters, away from the farm. One night, 2 years after the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottoman Empire, I was in the city with one of my sisters when some Roman Empire enthusiasts started a riot in the street. My sister's house burned to the ground, both of us inside. I was carrying my sister, trying to get out of the house, but it was so hard to see. I fell to my knees and then fell onto my sister. I had no more strength. I kept coughing and coughing, shaking my sister to wake her up as I no longer had the strength to carry her. And then I barely remember falling asleep. And I was very confused when I woke up again. I was not as surprised as I had been last time, but still very confused. I didn't understand why I was given another new life. This time I was in a town called Stratford upon Avon in Warwickshire, England. It was 1564 and my name was Malcolm Clement. I grew up with six sisters and I would have had two brothers, but I was the only boy who lived past my first year. I really enjoyed studying at the grammar school of King Edward VII, where I learned a lot from Latin classical authors. While I was there, I became pretty good friends with William Shakespeare. We were pretty close friends, and I performed in some of his plays with him. It was not a wealthy life, but sure was a fun one. I never married, and my father was not very pleased about that, but I could never find anybody that I had a real connection with. Except for William, of course. We were inseparable at times, the best of friends. I outlived him, best friends until his death in April 1616. I was 52, the same age as him, and I lived for another 3 years, but the world was just not the same without him. I miss working with him and being with him. I continued producing and performing William's plays after he died. It helped me remember him and keep his work going. I died doing what I love, performing. there was an accident. We were sword fighting, and my opponent, new to the world of theater, was not very good and hit me right in the gut with his sword. A fatal blow. But I woke up again. It was 1649 in Paris. It was a very politically charged time. A few years before I was born, Louis XIV became king at the age of 5. His mother, Anne of Austria, was named the regent until he became an adult 1 year after I was born. The 30 Years' War was also just ended the year before I was born, so I was alive during the fallout of all of that. Everything constantly changing in the political scene. I tried to stay out of politics the best I could. I read about the current events every morning, but spent the majority of my days painting. It was my passion. I tried not to leave the house. You see, I was fully deaf in this life. It's made it hard to ever leave my place. But it also allowed me to tune out whatever was going on outside my apartment and focus on my painting. Peter Paul Rubens was the most famous painter in Paris at the time. His murals were mesmerizing. I only hoped to be as good as him one day. But I guess that won't ever really happen because I died again. This death must not have been a very interesting. I don't seem to remember it. We must have fallen asleep one night and then woken up anew once again. But this time was different. I was inside something slimy, somewhere where I couldn't feel myself breathing, like I was underwater. I could feel how small I was, barely alive. Could I have woken up still inside my mother? Why was this so different from my previous births? As quickly as I woke up, I fell back asleep again. But I had a strange feeling that I was not going to wake up again in this life. Maybe this was the end for me, my true last death in my mother's stomach. Nope, I was wrong. I woke up again, same as the first four. I had just been born. I knew it was different than the most recent awakening. I didn't know how, but I was a different person now. Bertha is what they named me this time. It's 1814, and my family worked for the Morris household. I grew up working, helping my mother, learning how to clean, do laundry, make and mend clothing, and working with the Morris children. I really enjoyed playing with Emma, James, and Elizabeth. I became really close with all three of them. And I tried to play with them as much as I could, but it was difficult at times since I had to help my mother. And they had other engagements throughout the day as well, like school. I so wished that I could learn to read and write and play the piano like they do. Anyway, when we were teenagers, I became especially close with James. I was very fond of him, and hoped that he was fond of me too, though I knew that his parents would never approve of him being with me. I could still hope, right? One day, James invited me to the treehouse that was built for them as children. I was so excited. I told my mother I was going to hang the wet clothes outside, brought the basket out, and then snuck away to the treehouse. It became our spot, hidden from our families, our forbidden love. I would sneak away as often as I could to meet James. He was so kind and handsome. We, of course, ignored the fact that his parents would never let him marry me, and the fact that they were continuously trying to marry him to other women. Eventually, they got to him. He got married to Virginia Bagley, a horrid young maiden from the other side of town. I knew that he would never be truly happy with her. What was I to do? Was I supposed to let him be free of me and live unhappily with his new wife? Or should I stay with him in secret, as we have been doing? I knew what I needed to make myself happy. So I stayed with him. And that might have been the worst decision in any of my lives. I didn't believe Virginia to be a fool. She had her suspicions about James's affair, of course, but had no way to prove it, nor did she know with whom. One day, she followed James to our spot. She came out from behind a tree, seemingly out of nowhere, enraged, her face as red as a tomato. She came charging toward me, and about a foot before she reached me, I saw a sliver of something sharp held tightly in her right hand, pointed straight at me. It was over before I even realized what had happened. She stabbed me right in the heart. I could hear James yelling at her, but she threatened him with the same knife that she had just stabbed me with moments ago. He had to leave me there. I was all alone. They left, and I let myself succumb to the pain. I woke up again, tired of this world, wanting to just die and stay dead. But no, this time I was born in 1900, and by the time I was 14, a world war had started. I was so tired of seeing all of the horrors that the world had to offer. Throughout all of my life so far, I have seen so much devastation, and this war seems to be never ending. When I was 16, my family lived near River Somme in France. On July 1st, 1916, the horrendous Battle of the Somme had commenced. The English and French troops advancing on the Germans. It was a bloodbath. Artillery bombardment was all we could hear from the nearby battle. My family and I huddled together, scared, missing my father, praying that he was still somewhere on this earth. They were bombing all around the battlefield. We heard the bomb shells arrive closer and closer to us, and then nothing. I was asleep again. Unfortunately, that was also not my last life. I had lived and died 7 times now, living for the eighth. I'm in the United States of America. I just started high school and it's 2020. The world hasn't seemed to improve much since my last life. The World War was over, but then there was another World War that came and went. The world was definitely not a better place. Forest fires were killing nature and wildlife all over Australia. An orange-faced jerk is the president of this country, and kids are mean. I had a couple of friends in elementary school, but they've all drifted away from me now. I'm in high school and no friends. The lowest rung on the food chain. It's worse than being invisible. The football team and the cheerleaders, the rulers of the school, make a point of finding me every single day, constantly finding new ways to humiliate me. To make things worse, my father left my mom and I when I was 6 because my mom was too high to care about him. I've always wondered why he didn't care about me, why he left me with her. I had enough. I was done worrying about my mother. I was done crying over my father leaving. I was done with the bullies at school. I was over this horrible world. I decided one day that it was the end for me, hoping that this time would finally be my last. It wasn't. I woke up again, starting my ninth life. I was born August 4th, 2134, Scarlett Johnson. This time, I was not alone. I had a sister, born at the same time. Twins. We grew up fairly wealthy in a suburban neighborhood. I loved hanging out with my sister and my friends. I got married at 25 to the love of my life, what seemed to be the great love of all of my lives. The world finally seems to have changed. There's no war, there's no plague, there's no idiots in charge of things. I clearly missed a lot during my last little nap. I'm a writer now. I have a PhD in philosophy and was a professor at the local university. I retired when I was 75 years old, but continue to publish books. Zachary, my husband, is luckily still with me. I am now 110 years old. I have been thinking about and questioning my lives. Have they all been real? Or was it a bunch of vivid dreams from my earliest days? I'm on my ninth life, I think. Is this my last? Cats supposedly have 9 lives. Am I the same? Or am I just going to keep living and living new lives for eternity? What is the reason for this? Why me? Am I special? Am I the only one? I know my twin doesn't have these experiences. We shared everything growing up. I told her about my deja vu and returning memories. She thought I was making it all up. Maybe this was her first life? I guess I'll never know. The unknown. So much of the universe is still unknown. I have lived 314 years, over 9 centuries, and yet I feel like I know nothing. I have so many questions, but I don't even know how to start finding the answers I'm looking for. Do I even want to know? I don't know. Zachary knows. I have shared all my memories with him over the years. He doesn't really seem to understand what I've been through, but he accepts me anyway. I guess all I can do now is cherish whatever time I have left with him and hope that if I have another life after this, that he'll be there with me too.